Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 2 for this news report today. It's Monday, January 14th, 2013. My website is ggnonline.com, and on YouTube my channel is ddarko2012. My backup's 2013, but I'm still having difficulties getting access to that account. So we left off with here: the war on terror spreads to Africa as U.S. sends troops to 35 African nations. This is after, of course, the whole thing that's going on in Mali, right? The invasion has begun. But I'll leave off with this paragraph as far as our resources, and then we'll continue here onto news with Syria. So it says here, Timothy Alexander Guzman argues AFRICOM's, or the U.S. military's Africa Command, goal is to eliminate China and other countries' influence in the region. Africa's natural resources is another important element to consider because it includes oil, diamonds, copper, gold, iron, cobalt, uranium, bauxite, silver, petroleum, certain woods, and tropical fruits. And then we have PSYOP as entertainment. Said, this is from Cryptagon. I've been trying to understand what France's war in Mali is really about, but I'm coming up short. During my reading, though, I came across something interesting that's relating to a previous post on Cryptagon. Do you remember the one about population reduction through long-running serialized dramas? So it says here, you brought up Population Media Center. One of those things that we do, and that is a primary thing we do, is to use the strategy of communications that has turned out from everything we've been able to measure by the most cost-effective strategy for changing behavior regard to family size and contraceptive use on a per behavior change basis, so as we have not found on the planet. And this is the use of the long-running serialized dramas, melodramas like soap operas, in which characters gradually evolve from the middle of the road in that society into positive role models for daughter education, delaying marriage, and child bearing until adulthood, spacing of children, limiting of family size, and various other health and social goals of each country, i.e. just reducing numbers overall. Now, in researching drug trafficking in Mali, I came across a New York Times piece called "Mali Tackles Al-Qaeda and Drug Traffic." It says development is critical in dealing with the North, says Ambassador Milovanik. He said, but so long as security is unstable, it is hard to get those projects going. We cannot just throw money up there. So it goes on, as part of its broader efforts to counter extremism in northern Mali, the United States also underwrote a series of radio soap operas whose plot twists emphasize the dangers of extremism. So the question is in how many countries is the U.S. government running PSYOP, or psychological operations, as entertainment campaigns, besides the U.S.? And this is a new video that's coming out, kind of like the Innocence of Muslims video, Zero Dark 30. It's probably another Zionist operation to create strife and divide and conquer. And that'll be coming out soon. This kind of ties in with this story. I was going to cover it later, but I'll just do it now. More anti-Muslim ads in New York City subways. A new set of anti-Islam advertisements have gone up in 39 New York City subway stations by a far-right anti-Muslim group. And you can guess who they are. According to a Associated Press, group has purchased space next to 228 clocks and 39 stations for the ads. So it goes on here, says it would run for a month. The American Freedom Defense Initiative said the enemies of Israel are savages. Alright, then to Syria, we have 2013, the state of Syria and the dawn of a new year. So Syrian President Assad's speech crushes NATO hopes for capitulation, and the conflict drops from the headlines, which it did. Which is maybe why they just went ahead with the whole Mali operation. Global proxy war waged on Syrian soil has now dragged on from the beginning of 2011 to the early days of 2013, planned many years ago with the U.S., Saudi, and Lebanese officials admitting to the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh as early as 2007 their plans to overthrow the nation of Syria with a regional army of sectarian extremists. The conflict has cost many thousands of their lives and has jeopardized the stability of not only Syria and its future, but nations beyond its borders as well. The West's assault on Syria is, in fact, one of many steps along the path of war with Iran. And you have this addressed by Syrian President Assad saying enemies of God will go to hell, and asserted that his nation would not capitulate to foreign demands from its enemies in the West, nor interpret advice from its allies as orders. Says the speech contained nothing particularly new, but it was a signal to the West that to win the bloodbath they have engineered, they will have to do it the hard way. While the U.S. positions its Patriot missiles along Syria's border, with so much at stake, the next year of the conflict will depend entirely on the Syrian government and its allies' ability to stem the flow of fighters, cash, and weapons across the border, talking about Turkey mostly, and stem these terrorists' ability to further disrupt and displace the population. Talk about all these refugees that are really living in hell right now as far as the winter goes. And above all, present a viable deterrence against a West-seeking escalation. Lastly, if these terrorist legions of the U.S., Israel, Qatar, Muslim Brotherhood and its sponsors in Saudi Arabia and Qatar are faltering, it will be up to the Syrian government to communicate this to its people. If they are not faltering, then every effort by Syria and its allies must be made to ensure that they do. So they say the West is not just attacking Syria, it's waging political and economic war against China and Russia, and militarily occupying nations across the African continent via AFRICOM under the guise of fighting terrorism. It says whether the days of Anglo-American global hegemony are over or not, it's debatable, but the fight the West is engaged in to cling to its ill-gotten global power, if not to expand it, is very much real and ongoing. They're obviously gazing towards Iran and Russia's Caucasus Mountains next. Of course, we talked about the terrorist pipeline, the Chechen rebels, and that. Says here that they're also trying to sow socio-economic instability inside China, and that's also the agenda. It says if Syria invasion fails, as far as backing the terrorists, it will be the beginning of rolling back their sprawling ambitions globally. In other words, this 2-year bump in the road, talking about Syria not winning yet, the Western interests are going over in Syria is just one of many yet to come. President Assad of Syria orders commanders to target Israel and U.S. interests if assassinated. His remarks came after he attended several meetings with his senior commanders and discussed the country's security situation with them. The Algerian Al-Sharak online newspaper quoted informed sources close to the Syrian government saying on Monday, so who knows how credible it is. But it says the top commanders told him that the foreign hostile states will strive to assassinate him instead of launching a military attack on Syria. Persian translation of which was released by Iranian Students News Agency, the Syrian army commanders have told the president that the spy agencies of certain western states and Syria's neighboring countries have smuggled high-tech missiles into Syria to provide armed rebels and terrorist groups with a chance to target President Assad's likely residence. In response, Assad has ordered military commanders to target Israel and the U.S. positions in the region, specifically the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, if the western states succeed and assassinate him. You remember before they said this about Gaddafi out in Venezuela. They said it about Saddam Hussein. They said this about Assad already fleeing like a year ago. So a lot of disinformation out there, and I don't want to perpetuate it. I'm just trying to show you that all of this stuff that's going through the news cycle right now, and what I think, it's a very good possibility that this is more disinfo. Like they said, his wife actually is living in Russia or something right now, and then they said that a year ago. But it says Syrian president and his family have been living on a warship with security provided by Russia. So this is kind of a gouge, or basically a gouge at Russia, for aiding and abetting a brutal dictator. Syrian rebel leader assassinated and sparks fears of turf war. So the killing of a senior Islamist rebel commander near Syria's border with Turkey could indicate a turf war between armed groups that will hamper their struggle to overthrow Syria's president. So they're actually pointing the fingers towards this al-Nusra front. And actually, there's a lot of people that have been protesting against them as well. So I'm talking about the other rebels or Muslim extremists were protesting against al-Nusra. NATO-led militants don't seem to win in Syria. So you go down here, interview with this James Jatras, says that most people I talk to believe that the government's side still has its military forces, its advantage in heavy weaponry intact, that its social base is largely intact, then that the rebels are not likely to win a decisive victory unless there's an outside correct military intervention of the sort that we saw in Libya. So he's a former U.S. Senate foreign policy analyst from Washington. This comes after the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said in a statement that removing Assad from power would be impossible. Syrian demonstrators in Syria, as I guess Idlib, whatever, support the army and the government. They've taken to the streets in the northwest city to express support for the Syrian army and its operations against the foreign-backed militants. This was on Monday. They chanted pro-government slogans. It says on Sunday, Syrian soldiers in Aleppo arrested 8 armed men who had terrorized citizens and committed numerous counts of murder, robbery, and looting. Here's a pretty good article. You can go in there and check it out from the 8th of January. I mentioned it before, but we didn't go into it in any detail. Aleppo misery eats at Syrian rebel support. And it goes out, keep talking about how poor and starving they are. But it says here that, but it goes on here and it talks about how the residents or Syrians hope that Assad can defeat its, quote, terrorism. See, they say, quote, terrorism as if it's, not true or something. We used to live in peace and security until this malicious revolution reached us and the Free Syrian Army started taking bread by force, the unidentified couple wrote. We ask God to help the regime fight the Free Syrian Army and terrorism. We are with the sovereignty of President Assad forever. So, wow, nice propaganda. While they may not all seem like they're agents of Assad's security apparatus wanting to blacken the rebels' name as if they need help, their sentiments are far from rare in Aleppo, which is the truth. So, this is coming through a huge Western filter, where it's just blatantly obvious what's going on here, and they can't hide it, and they have to report on it. But they have to water it down as much as they possibly can. Much of the rebel commanders say that they blame much of this stuff that's going on, the looting and murdering and all that, on a few bad apples and opportunists. They say here that the 21-month-old uprising is actually dominated by the Sunni Muslim rural poor. They don't have a revolutionary mindset, he said, and this individual comes from a small town on the Turkish border. So it goes on, he says that he puts support for Assad at 70% among the urban population. That includes many ethnic Kurds, Christians, and members of Assad's Alawite minority. Then you have what they're calling the Little Lion. He's Syria's 11-year-old killing machine. And I guess he's a little AK-47 there, modified AK-47. And it says here that over his faded yellow jacket, a Free Syrian Army vest holds 3 extra clips, each with live ammunition and a walkie-talkie. So it says a Free Syrian Army badge sits on one side, rendering the Islamic Shahada and Arabic calligraphy on the other. He says he does not miss school and or want to stay at home with his mother and 2 sisters. I want to stay as a fighter until Bashar is killed. And moving on here to Afghanistan, we have NATO kills at least 4 in Afghanistan night raid against a mosque. The attack damages a mosque, sparked protests among civilians. So it killed 4 people and detonated a pile of arms. An explosion that damaged a mosque in the area. An Afghan soldier was also reported as slain. The second explosion was reported about 90 minutes later at the same mosque while civilians were recovering bodies from the rubble, and that explosion killed at least 7 more civilians. NATO denied having anything to do with the secondary explosion, insisted that those that were killed died of small arms fire. So this is a double tap where you go in for the rescue and they kill you. Usually they use it with drone strikes, but hey, there you go. That's very, very cruel form of humanitarianism, and it's like what the hell on wheels, moral mathematics, right? The Swede calls it. And then you have Noam Chomsky, kind of a philosopher who's talking about morality, and he blasted Obama, saying he has no moral center. So, in a video published by Al Jazeera English on Saturday, MIT professor and activist Noam Chomsky slammed President Obama for using aerial drone strikes to kill suspected terrorists. He goes on here and says that this man has no moral center. I think that they're right, Chomsky said. If you look at his policies, I think that is what they reveal. Just some nice rhetoric here and there, and if you look at the actual policies, they're pretty shocking. The drone assassination campaign is a perfectly good example. I mean, that's just a global assassination campaign. He goes on here and says, though the Obama regime or administration has repeatedly criticized Israel's settlement activity, they have not imposed any actual penalties, unlike previous presidents. In fact, Obama is actually the first president who hasn't really imposed restrictions on Israel. The U.S. vows strong commitment to Israeli regime security. The Israeli president says he's sure Obama will attack Iran. We have Jewish Democrats who are saying that they're confident Chuck Hagel will follow Obama's pro-Israel lead. And look at this. Don't take what they say too literal, because they know algorithms. They know there's anti-Zionist grassroots sentiment, so they try to co-opt that. Senator calls for reduction of U.S. aid to Israel from the 7th of this month. And Rand Paul, building in Jerusalem. None of U.S. business. Ooh, so it sounds kind of, protectionist. He says that the U.S. should not tell Israel how to defend itself. i.e., going being the aggressor and colonizing. I came here to show that I'm supportive of the relationship between Israel and America. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.